Hello again. Today we are going to be still looking at something very exciting and a continuation of our previous video on nervous system. Last time we discussed under nervous system, we were actually looking at coordination, and we said that all parts of the body work together for effective functioning of the body. We also said some things that metabolic processes don't just function individually, do not function individually. They are actually linked together to bring about effective functioning of the body parts. And then we also mentioned the communication system, because we said that communication brings about an effectiveness of coordination. And then we said we have two communication links or systems in mammals, mostly in man. We have the endocrine and the nervous system. And we looked at one or two things about the endocrine system, and we also talked about the nervous system, of which I gave you some important facts and tips that will help you differentiate between endocrine and nervous system. You can check in our videos, we mentioned that. And then we also looked at the nervous system, of which we explained a whole lot about the nervous system. We divided it into two. We called it the CNS and the PNS. The CNS simply means central nervous system. And then we have the PNS, which is the peripheral nervous system. Now, in terms of the central nervous system, I think last time we actually majored and we did a whole lot of discussion on the central nervous system, of which we explained in details what the central nervous system is all about. We said that the central nervous system comprises of the brain and the spinal cord, and we discussed in details about the brain. We said the brain is located at the head. It is actually a delicate organ and a highly specialized organ, which is divided into three major parts, with which we talked about the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. We also mentioned about the spinal cord as also a continuation of the brain. And we said these are sensitive, highly specialized organs that helps to bring about coordination. Today, we're going to be looking at another aspect of the nervous system, and that is the peripheral nervous system. Now, there are several things lined out which we are going to be discussing. And one of them is we're going to be looking at an introduction to it. We're going to be talking about the peripheral nervous system, what it is all about. We're also going to be looking at the types of peripheral nervous system. We're also going to be talking about we're going to look at the types of peripheral nerves. Please note it's different. Peripheral nerves. We're also going to be talking about the peripheral nervous system. We're going to mention the somatic nervous system, autonomic nervous system. We're also going to be talking about types of autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So these we're going to just discuss in details about the peripheral nervous system and their different types. All right. Now, if you are set, let's discuss this. Now, the first one is what the peripheral nervous system is all about. Now, the peripheral nervous system involves all nerves. We're going to be talking about nerves, and when we're talking about nerves or nerve cells, we're talking about the basic unit of the nervous system, the basic unit of the nervous system. These are cells that are involved in coordination. Now, every nerve cell that is outside the brain and the spinal cord, they are referred, in fact, they are all what we refer to as the peripheral nervous system or the peripheral nerves. Now, it includes the sensory nerves and the motor nerves and what we call the intermediate nerves. And we're going to be looking at the different types of neurons probably in our next videos or some subsequent videos. Now, also, we have what we call the types of peripheral nerves. Remember, it is not the nervous system. We're talking about peripheral nerves. Now, there are peripheral nerves that are found in the spinal cord, There are also peripheral nerves that are found in the brain. The ones found in the spinal cord, I think there are about 12 in terms of the somatic. And then also in the cranial nerves, we have about 31. Okay, so please note the two types of peripheral nerves. The next thing is, let's talk about the spinal nerves. Now, the spinal nerves are nerves that are connected to the spinal cord. They are connected. They are not practically there. Remember, we said that the peripheral nervous system are made up of nerves that are outside the spinal cord and the brain. So, but there are nerves that are connected to the spinal cord. There are nerves that are connected to the brain. So these nerves, or the nerves that are connected to the spinal cord, are referred to as spinal nerves. They are referred to as spinal nerves. Now, spinal nerves also serve as receptors. And when we're going to be discussing about sense organs, I'm going to mention receptors. Receptors can also be called sensory cells. These are cells or nerves that actually pick signals or impulses from stimulus. Okay, when we're talking about stimulus, we're actually looking at changes in our environment. So they can also serve, spinal nerves can also serve as receptors. They can also serve as effectors. Now, effectors are usually muscles that helps to bring about actions. Okay, so they can serve as receptor, receiving information. They can serve as effector, carrying out instructions from the brain in other parts of the body. Now, another important thing to note is that the cranial nerves, they are also nerves that are connected to the brain, just as we have the spinal nerves. The cranial nerves are connected to the brain. As the name implies, the cranial, which is the cranium. So they are connected to the brain. We also you should note that the cranial nerves, they can serve as receptors and they can also serve as effectors in the head. So from this, you can get two differences between cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Now, cranial nerves, in terms of differences, they are connected to the brain. That's number one. And then in terms of spinal nerves, they are connected to the spinal cord. And then number two, cranial nerves, they can serve as receptors and effectors in the head. And then spinal nerves can serve as receptors and effectors in other parts of the body. Now, moving to the next, we have the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system. Now, the peripheral nervous system is actually divided into two main systems, into two main parts. The first one is called the somatic nervous system, and the second is called the autonomic nervous system. So we have the somatic, we have the autonomic. Now, in terms of the somatic nervous system, it controls activities which are mainly voluntary. So the somatic nervous system controls activities that are mainly voluntary. Number two important fact about the somatic nervous system is that they are made up of 12 cranial nerves. So when we're talking about somatic nervous system, it has to do with activities that are voluntary. I am talking. I can choose to wave my hands. So these activities I am actually doing are connected to my brain. Okay, my brain controls these actions. Remember, we talked about the cerebrum. All right, we said that the cerebrum controls voluntary actions. So, in other words, the nerve that receives this impulse or receives the information and sends to my brain, and my brain interprets and all that, they are called the somatic nervous system. I can choose to run. I can choose to wag my head. Okay? I can choose to write. All these are controlled. All these information are sent or controlled or transmitted by the somatic nervous system. Also, the somatic nervous system consists of sensory and motor nerves. Now, sensory nerves are actually nerves that carries information from sense organs or from receptors, and they send it to the brain for interpretation, or they send it to the central nervous system for interpretation. While the motor nerves, they receive information or instructions from the central nervous system, and they send it to the effector organs. Now, the effectors are the glands. They include the muscles, okay? They include the organs. So they send it to to those areas so that they carry out those instructions. Now, please note again, it consists, that's the somatic nervous system, consists of sensory and motor nerves that conduct impulses from sense receptors to the spinal cord or the brain, and from there to the effectors. Now, the one that carries from the sense receptor to the spinal cord or the brain, which is the CNS, that's the central nervous system, is referred to as the sensory nerves. While the one that carries from the central nervous system to the effector is the motor nerve. So please take note that the somatic nervous system consists of sensory and motor nerves. The next thing we're looking at, as you can see also in the diagram we have here, so that's the sensory nerve, the somatic nervous system. You can see the spinal cord, you can see the brain, and you can see the nerve cells transmitting impulses. The next one is the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. Now, in terms of the autonomic nervous system, it is concerned with controlling the body's involuntary actions or activities. Now, you can see the difference between the somatic and the autonomic. The somatic controls activities that are concerned with what? Voluntary activities or actions, while the autonomic are concerned with controlling activities that are involuntary. Activities that are involuntary. Activities you cannot control at will. You can't control it at will. Also, please take note, the autonomic nervous system consists also of sensory and motor neurons that connects the brain or the spinal cord to the internal organs. Please get the difference between these two. In terms of somatic, it carries information or transmits impulses from the receptor. It sends it to the central nervous system. And from the central nervous system, it returns instructions to the effectors. But in terms of the autonomic nervous system, the spine, it is a connection or a link between the central nervous system and the internal organs, because the activities of the internal organs are not within your control. They are actually involuntary. They are actions you can't control at will. I give you an instance. Digestion process. If you finish eating, you can't control how the food is going to be digested. You can't also control the breaking down of those food substances in order to release energy in the cells. You can't also control the transportation of essential materials. For instance, if insulin is being produced by the pancreas and this insulin is being carried by the blood, you don't control it. You can't control this at your will. These are all internal organs. Most activities of the internal organs are usually involuntary, and the autonomic nervous system controls the link between the CNS, which is the central nervous system, and the internal organs. Internal organs like the alimentary canal, we have the liver, we have the lungs, we have the heart. All these organs are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, you can see the diagram we have there on the chart. You can see all the internal organs. If you look at the other one in terms of the somatic nervous system, you will also discover that it was just talking about the outward part of the body, like the muscles, the hand, the legs, the face, and all the others. These are actions or activities that can be controlled or that are voluntary. But if you look at this, it is activities that are involuntary. You can see the heart, you can see the alimentary canal, the small intestine, the large intestine, you can see the liver, you can see the lungs, you can see the kidneys, you can see the bile, the gallbladder, and all these are internal organs, and they are all controlled by the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is also subdivided into two main parts. We have the sympathetic nervous system, and we have the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Please take note again the differences between the somatic and the autonomic. Also, please take note of the difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, let's take a look at some of the important facts about the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system consists of nerves that connects the internal organs to, please note this, to the thoracic and the lumbar area of the spinal cord. Now, the thoracic region is the chest region. If you check the vertebral column, which is the backbone, the chest region, we have it as the thoracic vertebrae. Okay, so the thoracic region of the spinal cord, in connection or being controlled by the CNS, is what we call that's part of the sympathetic nervous system. Also, the sympathetic nervous system also connects the CNS, which is the central nervous system, to the lumbar area. The lumbar area is the upper abdomen. After the thoracic, you have the lumbar, which is the upper abdomen. And then after the upper abdomen, we have the lower abdomen, which is the sacral. And after the sacral, we have the next region, which is the caudal region. We have the neck, cervical, we have the chest, thoracic, we have the upper abdomen, lumbar, we have the lower abdomen, sacral, and then we have the down part at the hip region, which is called the caudal region. Is that okay? So the one that connects both the thoracic and the lumbar is the sympathetic nervous system. Now, the sympathetic nervous system also stimulates parts of the body for necessary actions in times of danger. It stimulates parts of the body for necessary actions in times of danger. So it responds to emergency situations. Now, imagine, I can actually link or connect this to the emergency hormone, which is called the adrenaline. Okay, the adrenaline, if you look at some of the functions of the adrenaline, we have things like increased heartbeat, we have dilation of the pupils or iris, we also have sweating, okay, and so many other things that happens during the adrenaline. Now, if you have that same picture, if you go back to our former videos, you're going to see it is similar, the same function with the sympathetic nervous system. Now, during their actions, the hormone adrenaline may be released. So some of the characteristics of the adrenaline hormone can be also seen as some of the functions or some of the characteristic features of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, now let's look at functions of the sympathetic nervous system. Number one, we said it increases heartbeat. It increases heartbeat. It dilates the iris. Okay, it raises the blood pressure. It inhibits the secretion of saliva. It also constricts the arteries. Okay, it also slows gut movement. Please note all these functions. Now, the reason for these functions is for you to understand the next one, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. Please note, the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system is antagonistic to that of the sympathetic nervous system. When we say antagonistic, it means it is actually opposite to that of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, take a look at some of the functions. Number one, some important things to take note about the parasympathetic. It consists of nerves. It consists of nerves that connect the internal organs to the 10th cranial nerve and sacral nerve of the spinal cord. Number two important fact is that it acts to restore the body to normal state after the effect of the sympathetic nervous system. So it simply means after the functions, after the exhibitions of the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system helps to restore the body back to normal state, to its normal state. So if there is a dilation of the iris, it restores it back to its normal state. If there is an increased blood pressure, it brings it back to normal. Okay, if there is increased heartbeat, it brings it back to normal. So that's the function of the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, thus, like I said before, the action of the parasympathetic nervous system is antagonistic to that of the sympathetic nervous system. Now, you can see the differences there. Now, in the chart we have here, you can see in the sympathetic, we have dilate pupils. And then in the parasympathetic, there is a constriction of pupils. In the sympathetic, you can see inhibition of salivation, and then here stimulates saliva flow. And here you see the relaxation of the bronchi, and here you see constriction of the bronchi. Here you see in terms of sympathetic, we have the accelerates heartbeat, and then in parasympathetic, it slows down heartbeats. And in sympathetic, it inhibits peristalsis and secretions. And in terms of parasympathetic, it stimulates peristalsis and secretions, and so on. You see also stimulates glucose production and release, and this one stimulates bile production. And in the other case, we have secretion of adrenaline and and this one does not secrete adrenaline. And then here we have inhibits bladder contraction, and this one does not inhibit bladder contraction. Rather, it stimulates bladder contraction, and so on. Now, let's take a general look at the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system. Number one, it slows down heartbeat. We have seen that. It constricts the iris. It lowers the blood pressure. It stimulates the secretion of saliva. It dilates the arteries. It also speeds up gut movement. So these are some of the functions of the parasympathetic nervous system. Please take note. We have just discussed about the peripheral nervous system, and we've talked a whole lot about the peripheral nervous system. We said these are nerves that are outside the spinal cord and the brain. And then we said we have types of peripheral nerves. We have the spinal nerves, and then we have the cranial nerves. The spinal nerves, they are nerves that are connected to the spinal cord, and the cranial nerves are connected to the brain. We also mentioned the two types of peripheral nervous system. We talked about the autonomic, and then we also talked about the somatic. And in terms of the autonomic, we mentioned the two types, which is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. Now, before we go, I'd like us to take a look at some questions using the ExamGuide app. Okay, we're going to be looking at, let's take UTME. It's coming close. Okay, let's take 2025 UTME. We're going to see some questions under nervous system. We're also going to be looking at the brain. We're going to talk about the brain. Look at questions that involves the brain. That's the central nervous system, the first one. And we're also going to be looking at questions that involves this particular topic on the peripheral nervous system. So let's take a look at this and see some few questions we can handle or answer based on what we have learned so far. Now, picking random. So you can see questions on nervous system come repeatedly. Now, a neuron that transmits directly from the sensory cell is a neuron that now we're going to be discussing this in our next video, but it's supposed to be the afferent is supposed to be the afferent neuron, which is the sensory neuron. We're going to be discussing that much later. We'll look at it more. Now, the part of the brain, this is concerning the brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for the control of voluntary movement and interpretation of sensation. The correct answer is the cerebrum. We said it controls voluntary movement. So it is the cerebrum. Then the next one, the part of the brain that controls body posture. We mentioned that and we said it is the cerebellum. Please note their differences. And then the next one, this is also neurons. We're moving away from this. Now, dash is a fast automatic response to a stimulus of an organ. Okay, that will come to that. That should be reflex action, but we'll look at that later. Now, we also mentioned some things about nervous coordination. Now, nervous coordination in animals involve A, they said all of the above. B says the transmission of electrical signals between neurons, yes. C says contraction and relaxation of muscles. D says yes, the integration and processing of sensory information. The correct answer is all of the above. Now, moving ahead, this is in neurons. This is in neurons. Now, the peripheral nervous system consists of 12 cranial nerves connecting the brain to the head and where? Connecting the brain to the head and where? In terms of the peripheral nervous system, to the head, and it is supposed to be the spinal cord. Okay, the cranial nerves. So it connects the brain. It is not the shoulder. It should be the neck because that is where connects mostly to other parts of the body. And if we move ahead, you're going to see several questions that have to do with nervous system. So you see there are so many questions. The ability of a living organism to detect and respond to changes in the environment is called what? Irritability. What we've been looking at so far is responding to our external environment, and that is simply irritability. Now, the part of the brain responsible for the control of voluntary actions and interpretation of sensation, we've mentioned that before, and we said is the cerebrum. We've also said which of the, okay, this one has to do with something different, and the part of the brain responsible for voluntary movement is a repetition. So you see that questions can be repeated over and over again. So this is where we're going to call it a wrap-up on this particular topic on nervous system 2. I'm going to see you in our next video. Bye for now.